So thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, Senator. I want to get right into it. I want to start with last night's joint session of Congress. During his speech, President Trump doubled down on the ongoing tariff situation with Canada, Mexico, and China. Of course, those three countries have retaliated with tariffs of their own that experts and CEOs of some companies say is quickly going to increase prices on things from electronics to fresh produce for Americans. What are your thoughts on the current state of those tariffs, and how do you see this playing out over the coming weeks?
Well, it's first of all, President Trump's speech last night was really an opportunity for him to talk about all that's happened in the last 6 weeks, which has been remarkable. Brought down the border by 95% in terms of illegal entrants, has focused on the fight on fentanyl, has unlocked our energy sector with a number of executive orders, and has begun to take the steps to get our economy back on track. You know, the tariffs is something he talked about throughout the campaign. There's two reasons to use tariffs. One is to change behavior, and the tariffs that are being used on China and Mexico and Canada are meant to stop the flow of fentanyl. This fentanyl killed 100,000 Americans last year, 4,000 Pennsylvanians. This is a big deal. That's a huge cost to our economy, and if they change their behavior, the effect on the economy is going to be very little. The other kind of tariff is a tariff based on reciprocity, to get a fair deal for the American worker, to make sure that other countries aren't treating us unfairly in certain markets. And the aluminum and steel tariffs are that. So we compete, the American worker competes with steel companies and aluminum companies that are subsidizing their businesses. So listen, we'll have to see how this plays out. We'll be watching very carefully to make sure if this has a significant negative effect on pricing. I think there's lots of reasons to believe that might not happen. It didn't happen last time. But the president will be able to adjust. I know he's very sensitive to prices and making sure that working families can afford the things they need. That's been a huge challenge under President Biden's leadership because prices went up by 22% and wages didn't keep up.
Okay, and so one of the things that people seem to be concerned about is how that's going to be impacting us, especially here locally to Pennsylvania. In our region, soybeans are among the highest concern with these tariffs, right? China has put a 10% tariff on them, which has left a lot of those farmers concerned. What's your message to them as we go through all of this? And is there anything that can be done to give people like them assistance at the federal level while these tariffs remain in place?
Well, as you know, agriculture is a critical industry to Pennsylvania. It's the number one industry, the number one amount of workers, $160 billion of GDP. So this is a huge deal, and I've been very focused on our farmers. Again, the idea, in a perfect world, we'd love to have open markets for both sides where we can sell our produce and our capability into other countries, and we have an opportunity to buy things from other countries. What's happened is, under the previous generations of leaders, we have had unfair trading practices. Canada is a good example. So our dairy industry is a huge industry in Pennsylvania. We don't have access to Canada for our dairy products. So what the president is trying to do is change the behavior on fentanyl, and if Canada and Mexico change the behavior, we're not going to have anything to worry about. And he's trying to make sure we get a fair deal with tariffs. I think it's too early to tell how these things will play out, but as they play out, I'm sure the president will adjust the policies necessary to make sure the American workers are. The whole goal of this is to make sure working families can have the opportunity that they deserve, and we haven't had that under President Biden. We're going to get that under President Trump and a majority in the House and Senate.
Sure. So some of those working families are some of these farmers, right, at places like the soybean farms. Let's say this goes on for a while. What can we do federally to help them, to help put bread on their table as these farmers who could be impacted by this?
Well, listen, I'm not going to speculate on what's going to happen with the tariffs. The tariffs are a set of negotiations to try to get a change in behavior or a change in market access. So it's very hard to speculate what we're going to do 6 months from now based on the tariffs that are put in place. And again, the tariff can affect things in different ways. So we're going to have to focus across Pennsylvania, and I am, on how the tariffs, what they do in terms of good things. So for example, the aluminum and steel tariffs are going to bring manufacturing back to Pennsylvania and make our steel industry much more competitive. And when other countries are putting tariffs on goods that affect Pennsylvania, we're going to have to see what the impact of that is and make sure we make the adjustments necessary. We're trying to do a lot with farmers to make sure that they remain competitive. The most important thing we can do is lower the cost of inflation, which is a big deal for farmers today. lower the cost of regulation, make sure we get a new farm bill passed. Those are the things we need to do for farmers, and those are the things I'm focused on.
Okay, I want to move on to the Russia-Ukraine war. Last week's fiery meeting between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Ukrainian President Zelensky led to a series of events that has led to the U.S. pausing aid to Ukraine, and some are now reporting that that pausing of aid extends to intelligence as well. Earlier this week, protesters rallied outside of your office in Pittsburgh, asking you to take a stronger stand in support of Ukrainian aid. On the campaign trail, you also said you supported military aid to Ukraine, saying that we made a promise to them. What's your reaction to last week's meeting, and do you still want the U.S. to continue to provide aid to Ukraine?
Well, I wrote an op-ed on this, which I hope you had a chance to read before this interview. But listen, I've been clear on this from the beginning. I do think we should support Ukraine with military aid. I said that during the campaign. I continue to believe that. But I also want to step back and say what President Trump's saying he wants to do is bring peace to the region. That meeting in the Oval Office was a terrible meeting. I really do believe President Zelensky failed to show both gratitude and grace in the moment, but that shouldn't disrupt our efforts to bring peace to the region. There's been terrible killing that's taken place based on Russian aggression into Ukraine. We need to find a peaceful resolution. An economic deal between Ukraine and the United States is a great way to make sure we have alignment and to actually act as a deterrent from further Russian aggression. We need to have the Europeans step up and do a lot more, which is what President Trump said. And we need to continue, in my opinion, as part of that deal, to give support, indirect support for Ukraine as a matter of ensuring deterrence against further Russian aggression. We need to give Ukraine confidence before they can move forward on a peace deal that they won't have to worry about another invasion a couple years from now. So that's what I think the deal looks like. And I believe that's what President Trump's trying to achieve. And I think there's a lot of negotiations that will happen between now and then, but I think that should be our end goal.
All right, we'll have to see where that goes next. Going back to that joint meeting, you brought a sheriff from our region as your guest last night to the joint session, Altoona Sheriff James Ott. Statement from your office on his election yesterday said in part that you picked him to attend because he's committed to addressing the fentanyl crisis, as are you. What actions are you planning to take on a federal level to combat that crisis here in PA and beyond?
Well, Sheriff Ott has become a good friend. The law enforcement community stood behind me during my campaign, and Sheriff Ott and I had a special friendship because he sadly lost his son to fentanyl, and we bonded on that and the need to really get fentanyl under control. I think the first thing we need to do has already been done, which is we need to stop the flow of illegal immigrants across the border. It's down 95%. And we need to designate the cartels as a terrorist threat, which Secretary Rubio did. I encouraged him to do that when he testified before my committee. I think those are important first steps. Now we need to actually have our military, our law enforcement collaborate with the Mexican authorities, with the Canadian authorities to stop this flow into our borders and to root out the cartels and the drug syndicates here in the United States. This week, I will introduce my first legislation, my first bill, which calls for a task force that will address illicit drug activity, particularly fentanyl, bringing all the key parts of the law enforcement community together to address this national crisis with a series of reporting responsibilities back to the Congress to make sure we treat fentanyl as the crisis that it is. We also need to do a lot on helping people break the horrible addiction to fentanyl, so we need more investment in those areas as well. This is a national crisis. 100,000 Americans last year. We need to take it seriously, and that's what I'm doing.
Switching gears to the budget resolution that's awaiting Senate approval now, there's been much criticism from the other side of the aisle regarding potential cuts to Medicaid in that budget. Of course, you represent Pennsylvania. That's a state that has more users of Medicaid than all but 4 other states at 3.4 million. On Wednesday, state representatives, healthcare professionals, and recipients of Medicaid in PA, they're holding a briefing to discuss these cuts that they say puts billionaires over Americans. With that in mind, would you vote to approve the bill as it's currently constructed?
Well, there is no bill as it's currently constructed. The budget resolution just laid out rough parameters for how to meet the budget agreement. So there is nothing to vote on now, but I think the starting point for this is we're spiraling out of control in our spending. We have $34 trillion of debt. We have $1 trillion of interest payments. We run a $2 trillion annual deficit. So we are on a path that is totally unsustainable for our kids. So we need to make dramatic cost reductions in the cost of our government. And that's what President Trump ran on, which was to shake things up in Washington, rein in the federal bureaucracy. That's what the DOGE effort is focused on. And what it's revealing is that as Americans, we're spending a lot of money on a lot of things that we didn't know about that are completely at odds with what most Pennsylvanians and most Americans think. So that's the starting point. The focus to begin with should be on a lot of discretionary spending. We invested hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies for wind and solar under the Biden administration. President Biden approved multiple hundreds of billions of dollars on student loan forgiveness. These things have to be ratcheted in. Discretionary spending has to come under control. And in the case of entitlements, we've said, or President Trump said, and I've said, that we're not going to touch Social Security, we're not going to touch Medicare. In the terms of Medicaid, the focus, in my opinion, should be waste, fraud, and abuse. And I don't think any American wants their taxpayer dollars to be focused on waste, fraud, and abuse. That needs to be a focus across the entire government. And what the DOGE process is revealing is that we got a lot of opportunity here to reduce our costs. We got to do it for our kids' sake, and that's what this effort's all about.
All right, thank you, Senator. One last thing. So as a new senator, you're in your first term now. Do you plan to hold any kind of town halls or anything with your constituents here in PA anytime soon?
Well, I hold meetings all the time with my constituents. I'm sure I'll do some form of town hall in the coming weeks, but today alone, I had 170 Pennsylvanians in one room who had come to Washington to request meetings from a variety of different groups all over the Commonwealth, and I gave them an overview of what's going on, and then I opened it up for any question they wanted. So that's the way I'm engaging across our Commonwealth. I've had group meetings of hundreds of people across our Commonwealth over the last week. I've been in back in Pennsylvania pretty much every single weekend since I was sworn in, and I'll continue to engage to make sure I am on top of the issues that are of greatest concern and answer their questions. We have seven offices across Pennsylvania. We've got leadership in all 7 offices. We've got a crew on the ground, and we're trying to answer the questions of Pennsylvanians every single day and address their needs.
All right, Senator Dave McCormick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.